he had made very good friends, almost coincidentally, with 2 or 3 Sufis, hither and yon, and one that I remember because she was such a striking girl, and also Francis really loved her very, very dearly. That was Shireen. And Shireen's grandmother was a Sufi initiated originally by Inayat Khan. So we saw quite a great deal of Shireen. I used to try to catch her on a weekend and invite her to run around in my new pride and joy, my Oldsmobile convertible, which I was smitten with, and so was Shireen, so she loved it. And the last thing that I did on Shireen's vacation visit during this period when Francis was there, she tried to spend as much time as she could with other Sufis and would come to the Sufi school, and I would entertain her, Francis would entertain her, her grandmother and mother would entertain her in San Francisco. And on a final visit on a weekend, she said, "Don, I know that you know Stuart Edward White, who is a great author and also a great mystic. By any chance, is there any possibility to meet him before I leave to go back up to the flying school," which is where she was employed. She taught flying, and she was a wonderful pilot herself. So I said, "Well, Shireen, I don't know, but he's a terribly open guy. I'll just go into the next service station and put in a call to him and see if by any chance he's got some time this afternoon." He did. We went up, just Shireen and myself. There was nobody else from the Sufi school with us. And when we went up, by that time, Stuart Edward White's wife, Betty, had died. And so he was there with just a manservant. He received us, and eventually, after chattering for some while, and I saw that Shireen was enchanted with him, he said, "Would you like to see my game room?" Because he was a great explorer as well. The cohort of Teddy Roosevelt. He and Teddy Roosevelt were co-explorers, both in the Amazon and in the jungles of Africa. So Shireen said, "Oh, I would love to." And so she said, "But would you excuse me, I've got to go to the little girl's room, and why don't you go ahead and I will follow along in just a few moments." So and we walked up the path into the back garden to his game room, hung with all sorts of trophies. And in a few moments, Shireen came up the path looking very confused. And she said, "Oh, Mr. White, I just feel dreadfully sorry. Some way, apparently, I have tipped over and I can't find it, some sort of a little perfume vial in that downstairs toilet that I was using. And I just have to admit to you, it could be dangerous because it might have broken, but I can't find it, and I didn't want to keep you waiting any longer." So Stuart Edward White looked at her very quizzically. He said, "That was Betty." And he said, "Whenever Betty sees someone come in the front door that she automatically likes, she chooses to wear her favorite perfume, Essence of Violet, and that's what you smelled strongly. Don't worry, it just means you've got another friend." So that was very touching, and I was just delighted, and Shireen was just over the moon, of course. It was such a delightful event. She was not the sort of mystic who expected, you know, strange things to happen and so on. She was just naturally bright and open. And that's what Francis loved in her. That's what I loved in her. Everybody did. And so Shireen took off. Now, here I just have briefly to tell you, 2 days later, Francis Brabazon woke me up in my bed and said, "Don, sad news. Shireen's been killed piloting her plane." As soon as the grandmother had called the Sufi school, it had been Francis who answered, and entirely in addition to his own deep affection for her, he knew my love for Shireen too, and told me the sad news. But that was so typical of Francis, and I always loved him for having had that news directly from him.
Shireen, Lament for the Death of a Young Airwoman by Francis Brabazon, from 7 Stars to Morning, published in 1956. I did not know anything about it. How was I to know? The sky was perfectly clear. There was not a cloud of sorrow on the face of the sky. There was no wind of betrayal stirring the leaves of the trees. So I did not know that death was marking out a track for Shireen through the sky. I do not believe for a moment that the laughter left her eyes, that her face did not continue to reflect the color of the sun, and so death fooled no one but himself. But I did not know. I did not hear the shriek of the wind as the plane passed it. I did not feel the earth tremble with the impact. I did not note the slight shadow that raced across the sun. But my heart knew it. And the telegraph wires picked it up and conveyed it to my brain. My heart knew it because it was already empty when my mind said, Shireen is gone. And as I said the words, a leaf dropped from a tree. A bird suddenly left its nest to look for food for its young. A thought came to a young mother to look at her child. There was a slight shiver in the blue curtain of the atmosphere, as though one of its rings had noiselessly slipped off its rod. And an old man looked up, and it was as though a screen slid back from across his eyes, leaving them open, giving him for one moment a clear view. My brain said, Shireen is gone. But my heart rejected the empty word. A sea had risen up over its natural boundary. A wavelet of salt water had overflowed into the crystal lake. A glassful of wine, in being passed, had slipped, and its contents was spreading over the marble floor. The guest was saying goodbye, but the host did not hear him. He was remembering the music of a certain fountain in a place where he had spent some of his boyhood. Nothing had really occurred. The atmosphere was serene. A bird had soared into the blue, and a feather had dropped from its wing, and a dog sniffing along the highway stopped in its tracks and chased it for a moment as it passed him. A ray of sun had filtered into the prison yard, and the prisoners had looked up for a moment and remembered beaches where an ocean raced over white sand. A rain cloud had passed over the plains. A few drops fell, and the earth had opened its parched mouth for the deluge. And the cattle who had left off pawing the ground stood gazing vacantly at the horizon. Nothing had really happened. But to the children marching up out of the earth, to the lovers seeking to focus their ardor, a light is denied them. To the women in labor and the men fretfully at evening, a comfort is withheld. To the bird flocks and the grasses and the companionate lands, an impulse is lost. Shireen was the best of young women. She was a young moon full of possibility. Hers was the potential gift of laying pathways along the earth. But who of us cared about the moon, accepting mirror-wise of his own desires? Who cared to put aside weaving the net of his own foolishness to pick up the thread of her calamity? The death of Shireen was the triumph of us, the mean little men who befriended her. The triumph of the telegraph wires, which fretted the event to our nerves and startled them to attunement with empty sorrow.